The world had changed in a way no one could have imagined. In what seemed like a flash, the world fell into chaos. Cities crumbled, governments collapsed, and humanity was left to fight for survival. The streets, once bustling with life, were now quiet, save for the shuffling of the undead who relentlessly hunted down the living. In the heart of a once thriving city now overrun by zombies, a group of survivors huddled together in an abandoned, dilapidated warehouse. Their faces were worn with exhaustion, their eyes hollow from fear, but there was something in them that refused to break. They were determined. They had to survive, for as long as possible. The leader of the group, Daniel, stood by a cracked window, peering out at the city streets. His hand rested on the rifle slung across his back, fingers tapping nervously against the stock. He knew they were being hunted. The zombies had been growing more aggressive by the day, but something about today felt different. They were being tracked, and the thought gnawed at him. "We need to move," Daniel whispered to his group, breaking the silence that had enveloped them. "Now." His words were met with hesitation. Tara, a young woman with short-cropped hair and a sharp gaze, looked at him with concern. "We can't just leave, Daniel. It's too dangerous out there. We're cornered." He turned to face her, his face hardening. "We're more cornered in here than out there." "Those things," he said, gesturing to the far corner of the warehouse where a small barricade had been hastily put up to keep the zombies at bay, "they're getting smarter. They've been gathering, learning. We're not safe here anymore." The group fell silent, considering his words. Across the room, Jared, a tall man with a weathered face and a knack for mechanics, sat hunched over a small generator, trying to keep it running. "He's right," he said in a low voice, looking up at Daniel. "I've been hearing them. They're getting closer." Daniel didn't need to hear more. The sound of the shuffling feet outside, the guttural groans, and the occasional scream from a distant survivor only confirmed what he already feared. They were running out of time. The group had been on the move for weeks now, hopping from one safe house to another. They had learned quickly how to survive in a world that no longer cared about human life. Every decision was critical, every step was dangerous. Trust was earned, and only the strong made it this far. But trust, in this world, was hard to come by. Daniel's eyes shifted over to Anna, the youngest of the group, sitting on a broken crate near the back. She had been quiet for hours, her wide brown eyes reflecting the weariness of their situation. She hadn't spoken much since they lost her brother to the zombies a few days ago, and it was clear that the loss had affected her more than she let on. "I know you're scared," Daniel said, his voice softening for a moment. "But we can't just sit here waiting to be slaughtered. If we're going to make it out of this city, we need to move now. There's a chance we can make it to the old subway tunnels. From there, we can head underground and make our way out of the city." Tara looked skeptical. "The tunnels are filled with those things, Daniel. They're no safer than staying here. They're our best shot. We take the tunnels, we get to the outskirts, and then we figure out our next move. But we need to leave now, while we still have a chance." A tense silence hung in the air as the group exchanged glances. Each of them had a different fear, but the fear of staying put was stronger. The undead were closing in, and every minute they wasted here could be their last. The decision wasn't easy, but it was clear. They had no choice. "All right," Tara said finally, standing up and grabbing her pack. "Let's do this. But if we're doing this, we do it together. No one gets left behind." Daniel nodded in agreement. No one gets left behind. As they gathered their things, the sound of scraping metal from outside the warehouse sent a chill down their spines. The zombies were getting closer. It was time to move. The group quickly and quietly made their way to the back door of the warehouse, checking the area before stepping outside. The air was thick with tension, but their resolve was stronger. They had made it this far, and they weren't about to let the undead take them down now. With one last glance at the building that had kept them alive for so long, they slipped into the streets, their every step bringing them closer to their goal, survival. But they knew the truth. No one was safe. And the real fight for their lives had just begun. The dim light of the fading sun cast long shadows as the group made their way through the debris-laden streets. The world had turned into a nightmarish landscape. The once vibrant city, now a hollow shell of its former self, stood as a grim reminder of what humanity had lost. Windows were shattered, cars lay overturned, and the scent of decay hung heavy in the air. Daniel led the way, moving with practiced caution. His eyes flicked from one darkened alley to the next, always alert. The others followed closely behind, their footsteps muffled by the dirt and rubble that had piled up along the street. Their breath was shallow, quick, as though the very air itself was a constant threat. Anna, walking just behind Daniel, kept her gaze fixed on the ground. Her mind was still reeling from the loss of her brother, the anguish still fresh. But she knew better than to show weakness in a world like this. There was no room for it. If they wanted to survive, they had to push through the pain, the fear, and the uncertainty. "Stay close," Daniel murmured, glancing back at the group. His voice was steady, but there was an edge of tension in it, as though the weight of their survival rested solely on his shoulders. Tara, ever the skeptic, couldn't shake the uneasy feeling gnawing at her gut. "How do you know those tunnels are still safe?" she asked, her voice low but filled with doubt. "We've heard stories, people who thought the tunnels were their escape only to find them crawling with more of those things." Daniel's grip on his rifle tightened. "I don't know. But we don't have any other choice. It's our best shot." Jared, who had been silently listening to the conversation, finally spoke up. "What if we get to the tunnels and they're blocked? What if they're swarming with those things?" "We deal with it," Daniel replied, his voice unwavering. "We find a way through." Tara nodded reluctantly. She trusted Daniel, more than she let on, but even trust had its limits when the undead were always just a step behind. The group continued to move forward, cutting through alleys and avoiding the main roads where the risk of being spotted was higher. As they neared the entrance to the subway system, a heavy silence descended on the group. The underground tunnels that could offer a potential escape also held danger. They were a labyrinth of darkness, where survival would depend not just on their physical strength, but their ability to navigate the unknown and stay hidden. The entrance to the tunnels was a rusted steel door, wedged open slightly. It was a grim sight, one that symbolized both hope and fear. They could go in and find safety, or they could find themselves trapped in a nightmare. Daniel motioned for the group to halt as he approached the door. He knelt down and, with a careful hand, pushed it open just enough to peer inside. His eyes narrowed, scanning the darkness beyond. "Clear," he whispered, but the uncertainty in his voice made it clear that the word was a guess, not a certainty. The group took a collective breath before they began to move into the tunnel. The air was cool and damp, carrying the musty scent of mold and mildew. The sound of distant dripping water echoed through the passage, adding to the eerie atmosphere. It was a stark contrast to the chaos of the streets above. "Stay quiet," Daniel instructed, his voice barely above a whisper. "We don't know what's down here, so keep your eyes and ears open." The group moved through the tunnel, each step feeling heavier than the last. They passed through the rusted remnants of old subway cars, now overgrown with vines and moss. The walls were lined with faded graffiti, remnants of a world that no longer existed. The tunnel stretched on endlessly, the flickering of their makeshift flashlight casting long shadows that seemed to shift and grow with every passing second. The atmosphere was thick with tension, and with each turn, the fear of what lay ahead grew. Suddenly, a soft groan echoed through the tunnel. The sound wasn't from the group, but from somewhere deeper in the darkness. Everyone froze, their hearts pounding in their chests. "Did you hear that?" Anna's voice trembled. Daniel held up a hand, signaling for silence. His eyes darted around the tunnel, trying to pinpoint the source of the sound. The group's breath was shallow, their every move calculated. Another groan. This one louder. Closer. Jared, his face pale, stepped closer to Daniel. "There's something down here," he whispered, his voice tight with fear. Daniel nodded, the weight of the situation sinking in. The sound had come from deeper within the tunnel, a place they hadn't yet explored. He motioned for the group to move faster, urging them forward as the unsettling noise continued. As they walked, the tunnel grew narrower, the walls seeming to close in around them. The further they went, the darker it became. The light from their flashlight barely cut through the thick gloom, making every step feel like a leap of faith. And then, in the distance, they saw it. A faint glow. A flicker of movement. The group stopped dead in their tracks. "Stay low," Daniel whispered. He could feel the danger closing in, the sense that something was watching them, waiting for the right moment to strike. As they crouched behind an old subway bench, the groaning sound grew louder, until it was all around them. The hairs on the back of their necks stood on end. Whatever was lurking in the darkness, they knew it wasn't just one of them. It was a whole new kind of danger. The group held their breath, hearts racing. What they didn't know was that the worst was yet to come. The group crouched in the oppressive darkness, every sense heightened as they listened intently for the next sound. The groaning, faint at first, had now become a low, unsettling hum that seemed to echo through the tunnel from all directions. Their breaths came in shallow, panicked gasps as their eyes darted nervously across the dim light of their flashlight. They could no longer tell if the sound was coming from ahead or from behind them. Daniel held up a hand to signal the group to remain still. His grip on his rifle tightened, the cold steel an anchor in the growing uncertainty. The sound was different this time, closer, more deliberate, as though whatever was down here had begun to move with purpose. Anna's hands shook, clutching the strap of her pack so tightly her knuckles turned white. Her eyes flickered toward Daniel, silently pleading for reassurance, but there was none to be found in his face. He was a leader, yes, but right now, even he didn't know what awaited them in the dark. A low growl rumbled from the depths of the tunnel, reverberating off the walls in a chilling vibration. It was a sound so deep, so primal, that it made the hairs on the back of their necks stand on end. Tara, who had been silent up until now, whispered urgently, "What is that?" Daniel's voice was tight with fear, but he kept it steady. "I don't know." The growl grew louder, followed by the unmistakable shuffle of feet dragging across the floor. Then, a sudden, sharp scraping sound, the unmistakable sound of claws scraping against the stone floor. The group instinctively pressed back into the shadows, hearts racing as they tried to remain out of sight. The flashlight flickered again, its beam shaking as Jared fought to keep it steady. His fear was palpable, his face pale in the half-light, but he knew better than to show it. They couldn't afford to show weakness. "Don't make a sound," Daniel murmured, his voice barely audible. They all held their breath as the sound of shuffling grew closer, the scraping becoming more erratic. It was as though the thing, whatever it was, wasn't walking at all, but dragging itself through the tunnel, desperate and hungry. The group remained still, barely even breathing, as the noise inched closer. And then, suddenly, a shape appeared at the end of the tunnel. The dim light of their flashlight revealed it just long enough for them to see, its twisted form barely human, its skin pale and stretched taut over its bones. Its eyes gleamed in the darkness, wide and hungry, and its mouth was open, revealing rows of jagged, broken teeth. The creature wasn't a zombie as they knew it, it was something worse, something far more dangerous. The thing stumbled forward, dragging its leg behind it, its claws scraping against the floor in search of prey. Its movements were erratic, wild, and unpredictable. It seemed to sense something, its head swiveling back and forth as if hunting for a scent in the air. Tara gasped, a sound she couldn't suppress. The creature immediately froze, its head snapping toward the noise. The group held their breath, but it was too late. The thing let out a guttural, inhuman scream, a sound so horrifying that it sent a chill through each of them. It was a scream of hunger, of desperation. And it was coming straight toward them. "Run!" Daniel shouted, his voice sharp and urgent. There was no time to think, no time to plan. The creature was too close, too fast. Without hesitation, the group turned and bolted, their footsteps echoing in the narrow tunnel. The flashlight bounced wildly in Jared's hand, casting erratic shadows as they sprinted down the winding passageway. Daniel led the charge, his mind racing as he searched for a way out, any way out. Behind them, the creature followed. Its movements were unpredictable, erratic, and terrifying. It didn't run, it hunted. Every step it took was calculated, driven by a need to feed. The sound of its claws scraping against the tunnel floor spurred them on, pushing them faster, further into the dark labyrinth that seemed to stretch on forever. They turned corner after corner, the tunnel becoming more claustrophobic with every step. Sweat poured down their faces as they ran, the oppressive heat of fear clinging to their skin. The only thing that kept them going was the sheer desperation to escape the horrors that chased them. But as they rounded another bend, they saw it, the entrance to another set of tunnels, an opening wide enough for them to slip through. A sliver of light shone from beyond, a faint promise of safety. They had to make it there. Almost there. Daniel shouted, his voice hoarse with exhaustion. The group pushed forward, their muscles screaming in protest, their lungs burning as they forced their bodies to keep moving. The sound of the creature's footsteps grew louder, closer. They could hear its breath, ragged and deep, right behind them, the stench of its decaying flesh overwhelming in the confined space. Just as they reached the opening, Daniel turned back. The creature was almost on them, its gnarled fingers reaching out with an eerie speed. "Go! Now!" Daniel yelled, shoving Anna forward. One by one, they scrambled through the opening, but just as Jared was about to slip through, a hand, no, a claw, shot out, grabbing him by the ankle. He screamed as the creature yanked him back, its grip like iron. Without thinking, Daniel swung his rifle, striking the creature's hand with a sharp crack. The thing recoiled, but it wasn't enough. Jared had already been pulled halfway back into the darkness. With a shout, Daniel grabbed Jared's arm and yanked him through the opening just as the creature lunged for him. The group tumbled out into the light of the next tunnel, breathless and shaking, but alive. They had escaped, for now. But they all knew this was far from over. The tunnel had become a nightmare, and they were trapped in it. The group sprawled out on the cold, concrete floor of the next tunnel, gasping for air. Sweat drenched their faces, and the adrenaline from their narrow escape still coursed through their veins. Jared lay flat on his back, his hands clutching the dirt beneath him as he took in shallow breaths, trying to regain his composure. Daniel stood a few paces away, his eyes scanning the darkness ahead. The flickering light of their flashlight cast long, jagged shadows on the walls, making every corner seem like a hiding place for the creatures that hunted them. He could still feel the pressure of the creature's claws, the echo of its scream in his ears, but he pushed the thoughts away. There was no time to dwell on it. "Everyone okay?" Daniel's voice cut through the silence, though it was tinged with exhaustion. He wiped his forehead with the back of his hand, trying to keep his focus sharp. Jared slowly sat up, still visibly shaken. His ankle hurt from where the creature had grabbed him, but it wasn't anything he couldn't shake off. "Yeah, just a scratch." But that thing, it was different. Not like the others. Tara nodded in agreement, her eyes darting around the tunnel. "I've never seen anything like it." "What the hell was that?" Anna stood a little apart from the group, her gaze distant, as though she were trying to process everything. "That wasn't a regular zombie," she murmured, her voice barely above a whisper. "It wasn't even close." Daniel's jaw tightened. He didn't have an answer, and he didn't want to think too much about it. All that mattered now was finding a way out of the tunnel system. If those things were down here, they wouldn't be safe for long. "We need to keep moving," he said, his voice firm. "The further we go, the more chances we have of finding a way out of this place. We can't afford to waste time." The others exchanged wary glances, but none of them protested. They all understood the urgency. As dangerous as the creatures above ground had been, this new threat, whatever it was even more unpredictable. They couldn't afford to risk staying in one spot for too long. Anna shook herself from her reverie and stepped forward, her eyes narrowing. "There's something off about this tunnel," she said. "It feels wrong." Daniel gave her a look, but he said nothing. He could feel it too, the weight of the air, the way it seemed to press in around them. The walls were rough, the tunnel's narrowness suffocating. This wasn't just a subway, it was something older, deeper, more forgotten. And that made it more dangerous. They continued onward, the narrow tunnel winding further into the unknown. The sounds of their footsteps seemed to echo louder now, too loud in the stillness. Jared limped slightly, but his determination was evident in the way he kept moving, not allowing the pain to slow him down. After a few minutes of tense silence, they reached another junction, another choice. The tunnel split in two directions, one going left, the other right. Both were pitch black, stretching endlessly in front of them. "Which way?" Tara asked, her voice steady, but her eyes flickering nervously. Daniel hesitated for a moment. Left felt wrong, an unnatural chill seemed to come from that direction. The right side, though, seemed more open, less confining. But there was something about the atmosphere here that unsettled him. "We take the right," he decided. "Stay close. And keep your eyes open for anything." They pushed forward, the left path left behind as they ventured deeper into the maze of tunnels. The flashlights beam revealed remnants of the old subway system, walls covered in rust and graffiti. The silence here was suffocating, the quietness oppressive. It was as though the world above had forgotten these tunnels existed, leaving them to rot away in the dark. But that silence was broken once again. A distant noise, a scraping sound, like metal on stone, reached their ears. It was too soft to be one of the creatures, but loud enough to send a chill through the group. It was coming from ahead. "Stay low," Daniel whispered, gesturing for the group to crouch. They immediately obeyed, pressing themselves against the cold walls. Daniel motioned for them to keep moving, careful not to make a sound. The scraping grew louder, closer. Then, a faint glow appeared around the corner of the tunnel, a light, flickering like a dying flame. It was almost imperceptible at first, but as they inched closer, it became clearer. A faint shape stood at the edge of the tunnel, barely visible in the dim light. Daniel's heart pounded as he motioned for the group to halt. He gestured for Jared to hand him the flashlight. Slowly, Daniel moved toward the corner, his breath held tight in his chest. He peeked around the corner, and his heart skipped a beat. It wasn't a creature at all. A group of survivors, barely recognizable as such, stood in the tunnel. They were ragged, dirty, and appeared as though they had been living in these tunnels for weeks, maybe months. Their eyes were wild, their faces gaunt with hunger, but the most disturbing part was the way they moved. They were jittery, twitching, and one of them had an unnatural limp, dragging one leg behind them. Daniel's pulse raced. They weren't zombies, but they weren't fully human either. Something was off about them, just like the creature they had encountered earlier. It was as though the apocalypse had twisted them into something different, something far worse. Before he could signal the others, one of the survivors turned, locking eyes with him. There was a wild look in their eyes, a crazed desperation that sent a shiver down his spine. "Get back!" Daniel whispered urgently, backing up slowly. But it was too late. The survivor was already rushing toward them, a crazed scream escaping their lips. The others followed suit, their broken bodies lurching forward, their hands outstretched, desperate. Without thinking, Daniel raised his rifle, firing once, twice. The survivors staggered back, but it wasn't enough. "Run!" Daniel shouted. The group turned and fled, the survivors closing in behind them with terrifying speed. The tunnel, once their escape, had now become a deadly trap. And they were once again being hunted. The group ran as though their lives depended on it, because, in this world, they did. Their footsteps echoed in the narrow tunnel as they sprinted, each of them pushing their limits to stay ahead of the mad survivors pursuing them. Daniel's heart pounded in his chest, his breath coming in ragged gasps as he led the charge. His mind was racing. How had they ended up here, caught between the living and the undead? It felt like no matter where they turned, danger lurked. The survivors, though not zombies, were just as dangerous. Their gaunt faces twisted with desperation, their movements erratic and unpredictable. One of them, a man, lunged forward, his hand grabbing at Daniel's jacket as they ran. Daniel barely managed to shake him off, the man's grip slipping off like an animal snapping at prey. "They're too fast." Tara gasped behind him, her voice tinged with fear. "We can't outrun them." "We don't need to outrun them," Daniel shot back, his voice firm. "We need to lose them." We keep moving, stay sharp. Jared, limping slightly from his injury, struggled to keep up, but his determination was evident. Where are we going? He panted, his voice hoarse with exertion. There has to be a way out of this maze. Daniel shouted back, scanning the tunnel for any signs of a way forward. The narrow passageways seemed endless, a labyrinth of dark corridors and rusty walls that seemed to close in on them with every step. But there was no time to think, no time to plan. They had to keep moving. The sound of shuffling feet grew closer, more persistent. The survivors weren't just chasing them, they were hunting them, every step calculated, every movement purposeful. Daniel could hear their frantic breaths, the low moans of desperation mixed with the echoes of the group's frantic sprint. Then, up ahead, he saw it, a glimmer of light. It was faint, but it was there. A small opening in the tunnel wall, large enough to squeeze through. It might be their only chance. Over there! Daniel shouted, pointing toward the opening. Hurry! The group veered off toward the light, their feet pounding against the concrete floor. The survivors were close, too close. Daniel's pulse quickened. If they could just make it to that opening, they might be able to slip through and get out of the tunnel. But as they neared it, Daniel felt a sudden, sharp pain in his side. He gritted his teeth, refusing to slow down. He couldn't afford to be weak. Not now. Tara was the first to reach the opening. She threw herself through, her body disappearing into the darkness beyond. Anna and Jared followed closely, scrambling through the gap as fast as they could. But as Daniel approached, something grabbed his leg, fingers, cold and unyielding. One of the survivors had caught him. The man's grip was strong, impossibly strong, considering his gaunt, emaciated body. Daniel struggled to shake him off, but the survivor was like a vice, his hand digging into Daniel's ankle. The survivor's face twisted in a grotesque grin, his eyes wild with hunger. Daniel! Tara's voice rang out from the other side of the opening. Come on! You can do it! Daniel's heart raced. He could feel the survivor's breath on his skin, hot and ragged. His eyes darted to the opening, just a few feet away. But it felt like a lifetime. The survivor's hand tightened, dragging Daniel back toward him, toward the madness that had consumed him. Daniel's mind flashed to his group, Tara, Anna, Jared. He couldn't leave them behind. He had to get through. With a growl of effort, Daniel slammed the butt of his rifle into the survivor's arm, the crack of bone splintering under the force sending a jolt through Daniel's body. The survivor screamed, releasing his grip, but the damage was done. Daniel felt the full weight of exhaustion crash down on him. His vision blurred, his strength waning. But he couldn't stop now. He could hear the others calling for him, urging him on. With a final burst of energy, Daniel pushed himself through the opening, his body scraping against the rough walls as he squeezed through. He emerged on the other side, gasping for air, his limbs shaking from the effort. His group was already a few feet ahead, still running, still desperate to put distance between themselves and the survivors. But Daniel's eyes lingered on the opening they'd just passed through, the faint glow of light now just a distant memory. They had made it out, but at what cost? The survivors would be waiting for them on the other side. Is everyone okay? Daniel managed to ask, his voice barely a whisper. Anna nodded quickly, her face pale but determined. We're fine. For now. Jared, still limping, gave a strained smile. That was close. Too close. Tara's eyes were wide with fear, but she was holding it together. What now? They'll catch up with us eventually. Daniel's eyes narrowed as he turned to face the others. We keep moving. We find a way out of here, or we die trying. But as they continued down the next corridor, the sound of footsteps following them once again echoed in the distance. This wasn't over. The survivors were still on their tail, and this underground maze had no end. The walls seemed to close in, the darkness swallowing them whole. Their only chance now was survival, but that was becoming harder with every passing minute. And the longer they stayed, the more they realized, in the world they now lived in, escape wasn't guaranteed. The group trudged on through the dark, winding tunnels, their feet dragging from the constant sprint. Every so often, the distant sound of footsteps, echoing, relentless, would make their hearts race again, the fear of being caught just behind them, pushing them forward. Daniel led the way, his flashlight cutting through the gloom ahead, scanning for any sign of escape. The tunnel seemed to stretch endlessly, with no sign of daylight or freedom in sight. They were no longer sure where they were headed. The map they had once relied on had been destroyed long ago, and with every turn, it felt like they were losing their grip on reality. The air felt heavier, more oppressive, as though it was thickening with the weight of the madness that surrounded them. "Daniel," Anna whispered, falling in step beside him. "Do you think we'll make it out? I mean, really make it out alive?" Daniel didn't immediately respond. He wasn't sure. For every step they took, it felt like the world around them was closing in. The survivors were still behind them, still chasing, and there was no way of knowing how long they could keep running. "We can't think like that," he said finally, his voice low but firm. "We just keep going. We'll find a way. We have to." But Anna wasn't convinced. Her face, pale from exhaustion, showed the same doubt that had been creeping up on all of them. The fear that no matter how hard they tried, it wasn't enough. The survivors were relentless, driven by something far more primal than hunger. They weren't the undead, but in some ways, that made them even more dangerous. As they rounded a corner, a strange sound reached their ears, one they hadn't heard before. It was soft at first, a low rumble that sent a chill down their spines. The vibrations beneath their feet grew stronger, almost like the earth itself was shifting. Daniel paused, motioning for the others to stop. His eyes narrowed, trying to pinpoint the source of the noise. "What is that?" Tara whispered, her voice barely audible. "I don't know," Daniel muttered, his hand instinctively tightening around his rifle. "But we need to find out. Stay alert." They advanced cautiously, their footsteps now careful, each movement slow and deliberate. The rumbling grew louder, and then, just as suddenly, it stopped. Silence fell over them like a shroud, thick and suffocating. And then they heard it, the unmistakable sound of something large moving in the dark. It wasn't a survivor. It wasn't even a zombie. The ground trembled again as the sound of dragging claws reverberated through the tunnel, followed by the unmistakable hiss of breath that was too deep, too controlled to be human. Daniel's heart skipped a beat as he turned to the others. "Get down," he hissed. "Now." They crouched, instinctively hiding against the walls, their bodies tense with anticipation. The flashlight flickered, its beam wavering as Daniel pointed it toward the source of the noise. The glow reflected off something moving. The creature that emerged from the shadows was unlike any of the undead they had encountered before. It was enormous, a hulking figure that seemed to move with a strange fluidity. Its skin was mottled with patches of decay, but there was something oddly animalistic about it, its hunched back, the sharp, angular features of its face. Its eyes glowed with an unnatural yellow hue, and its teeth gleamed like knives in the dim light. Daniel held his breath, his mind racing. He couldn't place it. This wasn't one of the walking dead. It was something worse, something new. The creature sniffed the air, its head swiveling from side to side like a predator hunting for prey. Daniel's pulse quickened. It couldn't see them, not yet, at least. They were in its blind spot. But that wouldn't last. "Back up," Daniel whispered, signaling to the group. "We need to move." Quietly. But as they slowly retreated, a sickening, high-pitched screech echoed from behind them. One of the survivors, disoriented and desperate, had found them again. Their eyes locked with Daniel's for a split second before the survivor lunged. The creature's head snapped toward the noise, its eyes narrowing as it began to advance, sensing the movement. It was a deadly combination, survivors, zombies, and this new horror. Tara reacted first, firing her pistol toward the survivor who was now charging. The shot rang out, but the survivor barely flinched. He kept moving, faster now, closer. And then, with a sudden shriek, the creature lunged, its claws extended, aiming for the nearest target. The survivor froze, caught between the terrifying force of the creature and the group running for their lives. "Move!" Daniel shouted, grabbing Anna's arm and pulling her forward. But Jared, caught off guard, stumbled. His ankle gave way as he tried to sprint. The creature was upon them in an instant, its enormous hand sweeping toward Jared. With a sickening thud, it slammed into his chest, sending him flying backward into the wall. Jared's scream echoed off the tunnel walls as the creature loomed over him, its massive form casting a shadow over his broken body. "Jared!" Tara screamed, but Daniel grabbed her arm, pulling her away. "We can't help him," Daniel growled, his eyes wide with fear. "We have to keep moving." They couldn't look back. The creature's growls reverberated in the tunnel, the survivors' scream cutting through the air as they ran, desperate to escape the madness that had become their world. They could hear the sounds of the monster tearing into Jared's flesh as they sprinted, every step filled with dread and guilt. But there was no time to mourn. Not yet. There was only one thought that kept them going: survival. The tunnel stretched endlessly, an oppressive darkness pressing in from all sides. Their lungs burned, and their legs screamed for rest, but the group had no choice but to push forward. The sounds of the creature's pursuit were still echoing behind them, low growls, scraping claws, and the distant screeches of survivors now turned prey. Jared's scream still haunted the air, and though they could not afford to stop, their minds were filled with the image of him, trapped and torn apart. Daniel led the way, his eyes scanning ahead. He couldn't let his focus wander, not even for a second. If they stopped to grieve or lose their nerve, they wouldn't make it out. His thoughts were a jumbled mess, but one thing was clear: the creature wasn't just a monster. It was something else, something deliberately hunting them. "Daniel," Anna's voice broke through his thoughts, quiet and strained. "Where are we going?" He looked over his shoulder. Tara was trailing behind her, moving with quiet determination, though her eyes were haunted. There was a heavy silence in the group, a shared understanding of what had just happened. Jared had been left behind. There was no way around that fact. They couldn't help him now. They had to survive. "I'm not sure," Daniel admitted, his voice low. "We just keep going. We need to find an exit." "Or somewhere safe," Anna added, her face pale but set with resolve. She wasn't asking questions anymore. The constant chase had worn down their nerves, but they were all functioning on pure instinct now, survival instinct. The rumbling sound was back, faint but unmistakable. The creature was still behind them, somewhere in the distance, but it was closer than ever before. With every step, Daniel could feel the ground vibrate beneath his feet. It wasn't just hunting them, it was hurting them, pushing them toward a point of no return. Daniel gripped his rifle tighter. He had no choice but to keep moving, to keep his group together. The tunnel had begun to widen, but with the extra space came its own dangers. It wasn't a blessing, it was a trap. "Do you hear that?" Tara whispered, her voice trembling. The sound of distant footsteps echoed, more survivors coming toward them, drawn in by the noise. "Stay close," Daniel ordered, his voice cutting through the quiet. "We need to find a place to hold up." They made a sharp turn, their footsteps muffled on the damp concrete. The corridor branched off, and Daniel hesitated, listening carefully. There was something unsettling about the way the air shifted, the silence hanging heavy between the distant sounds of the creature's growl. "Where does this lead?" Anna asked. "I don't know," Daniel replied, his gaze fixed on the dark corridor ahead. "But it's our best shot." They moved quickly, their shadows stretching long in the weak light of the flashlight. The new path seemed endless, winding deeper and deeper underground, but there was a sudden change in the air, cooler, fresher. Something about this tunnel felt different, like it had been untouched by the chaos outside. As they pressed on, Daniel felt the weight of their situation settle over him again. The creature, the survivors, he couldn't outrun them forever. They would catch up. It was only a matter of time. But as they moved deeper into the tunnel, the ground suddenly shifted beneath them. A low, ominous crack echoed through the walls, followed by a deep rumble. Before Daniel could react, the floor beneath them gave way, and they tumbled into darkness. The world spun, and Daniel barely managed to land on his side, the wind knocked out of him. His head slammed against the ground, but there was no time to recover. He scrambled to his feet, his pulse racing. "Tara! Anna!" he called out, his voice strained. "I'm here," Anna replied, her voice distant but strong. She was up quickly, brushing dirt and debris from her clothes. "Tara?" Daniel's voice cracked. "I'm fine," Tara's voice echoed from the shadows, followed by her shaky footsteps. "Where are we?" The group gathered together, their breaths heavy as they tried to make sense of their surroundings. The new chamber they had fallen into was vast, larger than any tunnel they had passed through. The walls were lined with cracked, decaying machinery, evidence of a time long past, and there were strange markings on the floor, symbols of something ancient, something lost. "It's some kind of underground facility," Anna observed, stepping closer to one of the walls. "This looks like it was a bunker." "A bunker?" Tara echoed. "For what?" "I don't know," Daniel said, moving toward a rusted control panel that still hummed faintly with power. "But we need to find out. It could be our way out." Before anyone could respond, they heard it again, the unmistakable sound of claws scraping against the concrete floor. The creature's footsteps grew louder, closer. It was coming, faster than before, and this time, there was nowhere to run. "Move!" Daniel shouted, his heart racing as he pulled Anna toward a large steel door at the far end of the room. "Now!" They sprinted toward the door, but the sound of the creature, its deep, guttural growls, was so close now that it felt like the very ground beneath them was trembling. The survivors, too, were drawing near, their footsteps echoing in the darkness. Just as they reached the door, it slammed open on its own, revealing a long, narrow hallway leading into deeper, uncharted territory. But there was no hesitation. This was their chance. Their only chance. "Go!" Daniel urged, pushing the group forward as the door clanged shut behind them, locking them in with whatever lay ahead. The fear of what was coming next, the creature, the survivors, was enough to drive them forward. Their lives depended on this hallway. The escape that had eluded them was within their reach, but they could feel the weight of the danger closing in behind them. They had entered a new chapter of their nightmare, but they couldn't stop now. Not yet. The hallway stretched out before them, dark and narrow, with the faint hum of machinery echoing in the walls. Daniel's breath came in shallow gasps, his heart pounding in his chest. The doors behind them were locked, but he didn't trust them to hold for long. The creature was relentless, and the survivors weren't far behind. They had no time to waste. "Keep moving," Daniel urged, his voice steady despite the chaos in his mind. "We don't have much time." Anna and Tara nodded, their faces grim but determined. The hallway ahead seemed endless, its walls lined with strange machinery, rusted pipes, and doors that had long been forgotten. But despite the eerie silence, the group couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. This place felt like it had been abandoned for decades, or maybe longer. It was a relic of the past, and the past didn't care about their survival. Daniel led the way, his flashlight cutting through the darkness. The others followed closely behind, each footstep echoing in the tight corridor. As they moved deeper, the air grew colder, the faint hum of electricity becoming more pronounced. It was as if they were walking through the bones of a forgotten world, a place where time had stopped long before the apocalypse had begun. They came to a set of heavy steel doors at the end of the hallway. The door handles were rusted, and the metal groaned under the slightest pressure. Daniel hesitated for a moment, listening. He could hear the faint scratching of claws against metal in the distance, closer now. The creature was on their trail, and the survivors were not far behind. "Let's hope this works," he muttered under his breath as he reached for the door. With a grunt of effort, Daniel pulled the door open, revealing a large room beyond. The walls were lined with strange machines, some of which were still humming with power, their screens flickering with outdated data. There were old crates and containers stacked in the corners, some open, others sealed shut. It looked like a forgotten laboratory, left behind when the world collapsed. This is it, Anna said, her voice barely above a whisper. This place, this is a bunker. A safe house. It could be our way out. Daniel didn't respond right away. His eyes scanned the room, but his mind was racing, analyzing the possibilities. They couldn't stay here for long. There was no telling what kind of horrors this place held. If it had been abandoned, it might be just as dangerous as the creatures chasing them. We need to find something to barricade the door, Tara said, her voice tense as she looked over her shoulder. It's only a matter of time before they catch up. Daniel nodded. Right. Help me find something heavy. They quickly began to search the room, pulling crates and debris toward the door. Their movements were frantic, each second ticking away as the sounds of the creature's growls grew louder, closer. It was only a matter of time before it found them. Daniel, Anna called out, her voice sharp with panic. There's something on this screen. It's some kind of control panel. He rushed over to her, his heart sinking as he saw the flickering screen. It was a map of the area, a blueprint of the facility, but something about it felt off. The map was incomplete, sections of it were blurred, as if someone had deliberately erased them. What is this place? Daniel murmured, trying to make sense of the map. It looks like an old military installation. Anna's fingers flew over the keyboard, trying to bring up more information. It's a bunker, but it's not like any bunker I've ever seen. It was designed to withstand some kind of attack, biological or chemical, maybe. So we're in the middle of a fallout shelter? Tara asked, her voice tinged with disbelief. Not exactly, Anna replied, her voice steady but filled with uncertainty. This isn't just a shelter. This was a research facility, a place to develop weapons or biological agents. This whole place was built to survive an apocalypse. But it looks like they abandoned it. Before they could process this new information, the loud, echoing sound of scratching claws filled the room again. The creature was closing in. The survivors, too, could be heard, their footsteps growing louder in the distance. We don't have time to figure out what this place is, Daniel said sharply, his voice full of urgency. We need to find a way out. Now. Anna nodded, her fingers moving quickly over the control panel as she tried to bring up more information. There's an exit, through the upper levels, she said. We need to get to the main elevator shaft. Then let's go, Daniel said, his heart pounding. We don't have much time. They quickly gathered their things and began moving toward the far side of the room, where a set of rusted metal stairs led upward. The noise behind them was growing louder, the creature's growls shaking the walls. The survivors were almost there. As they ascended the stairs, they could feel the tremors in the ground. The creature was almost upon them. They had seconds, maybe minutes, before it would be too late. They reached the top of the stairs and found themselves in a long hallway. The exit was at the far end, but as they moved forward, the door at the end of the hallway creaked open on its own, and a familiar figure stepped into view. It was one of the survivors. Thought you could escape, huh? The man snarled, his eyes wild with desperation. His clothes were torn, and blood was smeared across his face. You won't make it out alive. Before Daniel could respond, the creature appeared behind the survivor, its claws scraping along the floor. The man screamed, but it was too late. The creature lunged, its jaws snapping shut around him. For a moment, everything seemed to freeze. The creature, the survivor, it was all a blur of motion. But then Daniel snapped back into focus. We have to move, now, he shouted. The group bolted forward, sprinting toward the exit as the creature's horrifying roar echoed behind them. The door ahead was their only hope, their only chance at escape. With one final push, they reached the door, bursting into the daylight beyond, leaving the nightmare behind. But as they stepped into the sunlight, they knew that survival was never certain. The world outside had changed, and the walking danger had only just begun.